It's 1928, London. Late summer. A scientist named Alexander Fleming has just come back from vacation. He's refreshed, relaxed, and the moment he walks into his laboratory, he knows something is wrong. One of his experiments is ruined. A strange green mold has crept into one of his petri dishes while he was gone and contaminated everything. He picks it up. He's about to throw it in the bin, and then he stops because something is strange, something he has never seen before. Around that mold, every single bacterium is dead. He stares at it, and he asks himself one question. What is killing them? That question, asked by one curious man on one ordinary morning in London, would go on to save over 200 million lives. Welcome to Stories of Drug Discovery, where every week we bring you the remarkable, surprising, and deeply human stories behind the medicines that change the world. Perfect for whenever you have a few minutes and a curious mind, whether you are driving, walking, cooking, or just sitting with a cup of coffee. Today, penicillin, the accidental discovery that became the greatest medical breakthrough in human history. Let's get into it. To really understand what penicillin meant, you have to understand the world before it existed. And it was a terrifying world. A small cut on your finger could kill you. A tooth infection could kill you. Getting a sore throat, a scraped knee, a minor wound that got a little dirty, any of these could turn into something fatal within days. There were no antibiotics. There was no treatment. If bacteria got into your body and decided to spread, doctors could only watch. And hope. Fleming had seen this up close during World War I. He was posted as a young army doctor in battlefield hospitals in France. Every single day, he watched young men, some barely 18 years old, come in with wounds that should have been survivable. A bullet wound to the leg, a deep cut from shrapnel, injuries that today would be treated and forgotten within a week. But in 1916, without any way to fight the infection that followed, those wounds became death sentences. He watched them deteriorate day by day. Fever rising, wounds turning, nothing he could do. He never forgot those faces. He came home from that war with one obsession: find something that kills bacteria before they kill us. Cut to 1928. Fleming is back in his laboratory at St. Mary's Hospital in London. He looks at that contaminated petri dish and recognizes immediately that something in that mold is killing bacteria. Powerfully, efficiently. He names the active substance penicillin. He publishes his findings in 1929. He tells the scientific world this mold produces something that destroys bacteria. And the scientific world essentially says, interesting, and moves on. Which, if you know anything about scientists, is a bit like telling someone their souffle is interesting, polite, meaningless, and everyone moves on. Because Fleming has one problem: he cannot purify penicillin. Every time he tries to isolate it and concentrate it, it falls apart. Think of it like trying to catch smoke with your bare hands. You can see it, you know it's there, but the moment you reach for it, it's gone. Unstable, fragile, impossible to work with. After a few frustrating years, he gives up. His paper sits untouched in the scientific literature for an entire decade, unread, uncited, forgotten. The cure for bacterial infections existed, and nobody knew. Fast forward to 1938, Oxford University. A scientist named Ernst Chain is going through old research papers, the kind of tedious work most scientists absolutely hate, and he stumbles across Fleming's forgotten 1929 paper. Chain was a fascinating character in his own right, a German Jewish refugee who had fled Nazi Germany in 1933, arriving in Britain with almost nothing. Brilliant, intense, and famously difficult to work with. He brings the paper to his boss, an Australian pathologist named Howard Florey. Florey reads it and immediately feels something click. Now, Florey and Chain were quite different personalities. Florey was calm, methodical, and deeply practical. Chain was passionate, excitable, and convinced from the start that this was going to be something extraordinary. Together, they were the perfect team. One who believed completely, and one who made sure the work actually got done. They spend the next 2 years doing what Fleming couldn't. Slowly, painstakingly. They figure out how to extract penicillin, purify it, and stabilize it. It is exhausting work. Failed experiment after failed experiment. Working with improvised equipment in a cramped laboratory while bombs fell on British cities outside. Because this is now 1940. World War II has begun, and the pressure to find something, anything, that could save wounded soldiers has never been greater. But by 1940, they have just enough to try something extraordinary. They design an experiment. 8 mice, all 8 injected with enough bacteria to kill them within hours. 4 get penicillin. 4 get nothing. It sounds like the world's most stressful science fair project. The next morning, Florey walks into the laboratory. The 4 untreated mice dead. The 4 treated mice perfectly alive, running around, completely healthy. Florey, a serious, unsentimental scientist, looked at those 4 living mice and said quietly, "It looks like a miracle." Now, before we go further, you might be wondering, how does penicillin actually kill bacteria? Here is the simple version. Bacteria have a protective wall around them, like the walls of a fortress. Without that wall, they fall apart and die. Penicillin sneaks in and destroys the very machinery bacteria use to build that wall. No wall, no bacteria. Problem solved. Think of penicillin as a tiny saboteur, not attacking the bacteria directly, but quietly dismantling their only protection from the inside. And here is the beautiful part. Human cells don't have this kind of wall, so penicillin destroys the bacteria and leaves everything else completely untouched. That selectivity, that precision, is what makes it such a remarkable drug. They needed to test it in a human being, and they didn't have to wait long for a patient. His name was Albert Alexander, a 43-year-old police officer, a husband, a father. He had scratched his face on a rosebush. That scratch got infected, and the infection spread to his face, his eyes, his lungs, throughout his entire body. He had already lost one eye. He was lying in a hospital bed, fading away, and there was nothing anyone could do. Fast forward to February 12, 1941. Florey's team injects him with penicillin. Within 24 hours, he is better. The fever is dropping. The infection is retreating. Within days, he is sitting up in bed, eating, talking, smiling. He is going to live. And then they run out of penicillin. The quantities they could produce were desperately small. They were so determined to save him that they collected his urine every single day, extracting traces of penicillin his body hadn't used, purifying it, and injecting it back into him. Yes, they were recycling his urine to save his life. Science is not always glamorous, people. It still wasn't enough. After 5 days, the penicillin was gone. The infection came roaring back. Albert Alexander died in March 1941. It remains one of the most heartbreaking moments in medical history. The cure existed. It was working. There just wasn't enough of it. But the proof was undeniable. Penicillin could save lives. The only question now was, how do you make enough of it? Florey flew to America looking for help. He needed the resources to produce penicillin at massive scale. Britain was being bombed nightly. British pharmaceutical companies simply didn't have the capacity. America did. Scientists put out an unusual call. Bring us anything moldy. Moldy bread. Moldy cheese. Moldy fruit. They were hunting for a strain of the mold that produced penicillin in larger quantities, which is genuinely the only time in history that bringing your boss a rotten piece of fruit was considered a good career move. Laboratory workers and members of the public brought in moldy samples from all over the country. Hundreds of samples tested. Hundreds of disappointments. And then one day in 1943, a laboratory assistant named Mary Hunt walked in from a local market in Peoria, Illinois, carrying a cantaloupe, a very moldy cantaloupe. Nobody knows exactly why she picked that particular cantaloupe. Maybe it looked interesting. Maybe it was on sale. Maybe she just had excellent instincts. Whatever the reason, the mold growing on that cantaloupe produced 200 times more penicillin than Fleming's original strain. 200 times. Mary Hunt became known forever after as Moldy Mary, a nickname she apparently wore with considerable pride. And that cantaloupe, sitting forgotten on a market stall in Peoria, Illinois, changed the course of history. Production scaled up rapidly, and by June 1944, D-Day. The Allied forces had enough penicillin to treat every single wounded soldier who needed it. Historians believe penicillin saved hundreds of thousands of lives during World War II alone. In World War I, infected wounds were the leading cause of death. In World War II, they weren't. That difference is penicillin. Cut to 1945. Fleming, Florey, and Chain share the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. Fleming becomes the most famous of the three. His face on magazine covers. honorary degrees from universities around the world, a knighthood, the humble Scottish scientist who noticed what nobody else noticed. But the story behind the Nobel Prize is more complicated than it appears. Fleming and Chain famously did not get along. Chain felt strongly that Fleming received far too much credit, and that he and Florey had done the real work of turning a curious observation into an actual medicine. He wasn't entirely wrong. Fleming observed. Florey and Chain delivered. Fleming himself was always careful to acknowledge this publicly, insisting that without Florey and Chain, his 1929 paper would have remained a footnote forever. Which is a remarkably gracious thing to say when the whole world is calling you a genius. But here is the part of the story that truly stays with me. In his Nobel acceptance speech, Fleming gave the world a warning. He said, if penicillin is ever used carelessly, bacteria will learn to resist it. He had already seen this happening in his own laboratory. He was right. Think of it this way. If you send the same army to fight the same enemy every single day, eventually the enemy figures out your tactics. They adapt, they survive, and suddenly your most powerful weapon isn't so powerful anymore. That is exactly what antibiotic resistance is. Bacteria learning to outsmart the fortress destroyer. Today, antibiotic resistance is one of the most serious threats we face as a species. The WHO warns that by 2050, drug-resistant infections could kill 10 million people every more than cancer. More than cancer that saved 200 million lives. And within it, a ticking clock. Fleming could have thrown that petri dish away on an ordinary morning in 1928. He didn't. And that one small decision, that single moment of curiosity, echoes through every life saved by antibiotics ever since. That's the power of asking why. If you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe so you never miss a new one. And if you know someone who loves a good story, whether they are a researcher, a scientist, a doctor, a nurse, a student, or simply someone with a curious mind, share this with them. The best stories are always better when shared. Every week, a new story. Next week, a drug discovered during a heart disease trial that the patients absolutely refused to give back. Trust me, you'll want to hear that one. See you next week.